Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone. Welcome back to today's webinar program. My name is Astika from Secretariat of World Zakat Forum. I'm the moderator on these sessions today, and I feel very privileged to welcome you all on behalf of World Zakat Forum webinar series. I would like to thank you for joining us today for this special dialogue on Islamic Social Finance Report 2020. For those who has not read the report yet, the Islamic Development Bank has released the report of Islamic social finance. You may download first on the Google, and then you may find the report, the document, so we can discuss about it. And then it is very interesting topic, I think, to be discussed today. I'm sure it is going to be a great 1 hour of online interactions and learning for all of us. And today we have distinguished speakers. Uh, we have distinguished speakers today. The first, we have Dr. Mohamed Obaidullah. He works as lead research economist in Islamic Research and Training Institute, or IRTI, from Islamic Development Bank Grup Regional Indonesia. It is responsible for knowledge creations and disseminations in Islamic economics and finance of ISDB member countries. Assalamualaikum, Doctor. How are you?
Walaikum salam, Sister Astika. Thank you very much.
Alhamdulillah, excellent. And actually, we have another speaker, Mr. Kamal Mahmoud, but he has not joined us yet because he has unstable internet connections in his country. So he is a manager of Zakat Chamber of Sudan, and he is also as a former Secretary General of Zakat Chamber in Sudan. And he may join us if his internet connections are ready. And well, before we started these sessions, let me explain a little bit about how we run the program. We will discuss about the topic first, and then there will be explanations from the speakers. After hearing the panelist perspective, then there will be ask and question sessions for those who wants to give the questions, particularly the audience at home. The questions will be taken from YouTube chat box, so you may type the questions on the chat box below, and then I will select several questions from the chat box, and then I will select several questions during on air. Is it clear, Doctor?
Yeah.
Okay. So talking about the Islamic social finance today, the Islamic social finance sector broadly comprises of the traditional Islamic institutions based on philanthropy like zakat, wakaf, and sadaqah, and the contemporary Islamic microfinance institutions that aim at alleviating the poverty. Although poverty levels have fallen dramatically since 2000, there are still 783 million people living below the international poverty line of $1.9 a day. We may need more creative and effective solutions to end the poverty, I think. So, Dr. Obaidullah, how Islamic social finance give the solutions to end the poverty? Please explain.
Thank you, Sister Astika. This is I would say, the most important rationale underlying the Islamic social finance tools and different mechanisms. These are all rooted in the Islamic philanthropic institutions and not-for-profit modes. Like we know about zakat, has been most important institution, the third pillar of Islam. And obviously this has the greatest role to play in what we call comprehensive human development, which is in conformity, in line with the objectives of the Sharia, the objectives of the goals of the Sharia, or as we call maqasid Sharia. In addition to zakat, it has been traditionally or historically, we have seen instances how zakat has been used to make a dent on poverty, and in fact, there are historical instances where poverty has been completely eradicated in certain time periods in certain localities. But in addition to that, we look forward to other institutions as well, which are also rooted in philanthropy, like Sadaqah, for example, which is again charity without any strings attached. And of course, we are talking about Awqaf, or Islamic endowments, which basically mean you have a sustainable source of benefits. You can express these benefits as cash flows, or these are simply benefits or manfaat, which which are dedicated to certain uses that could be related to poverty alleviation. It could be related to provision of other public goods, and so on and so forth. And then you also are looking at the use of government revenues or taxes, the pro-poor expenditure, the fiscal policies of the governments, which also have a role, they have a no less significant role in poverty alleviation. So what we basically are looking forward to, or what we try to offer as a solution from Islamic economics, is a possible integration of this institutions of zakat and awqaf, sadaqah, with the pro-poor expenditure of the government. And to the extent this integration is done effectively, you are going to see results on the ground. We are going to see poverty being reduced. And as you very rightly pointed out in the beginning, that there has been a lot of achievements in the field of poverty alleviation. Many countries, including Indonesia, have reported remarkable progress when it comes to poverty alleviation. And one of the factors, of course, is our Islamic social finance instruments. And as we very rightly or very proudly share this, I'm now in Indonesia, and I see this as I call it a University of Islamic Microfinance or Islamic Philanthropy. Because this is the place where you see a very good integration between different institutions of philanthropy, and also between the fiscal ministries and also the central bank. And this is something that you don't find anywhere else. And I can say it with certainty that this kind of integration between different institutions is what is really should be the goal for most governments, especially in the Islamic countries where zakat has a firm root, whether in a formal way or in a informal way. It is there, it has been there, and awqaf has been there for centuries. And it's another matter how you're going to make the best effective use of these institutions and reform these institutions and bring them in line with the contemporary realities and make them address today's problems.
Okay, thanks for your nice explanations. And then you said in the report document, it is important to recreate a culture that promotes wakaf and zakah as an important social economic institutions. How do we should do to create greater awareness of enhanced role of zakat and wakaf?
Yeah, thank you for this very, I would say, profound question, because it requires a rather lengthy answer. And if you permit me, I can get into a little more details into these different issues or different challenges that face or what should be done with respect to the zakat and awqaf sector. The issue is that Asia is at three levels. We have problems or have good and bad practices at the highest level, at the macro level, as we call it, and also at the low levels, like what we call meso level, and also at a micro level. At a macro level, we talk about an enabling regulatory and policy environment, which is very, very important. Whether we're talking about zakat or awqaf, or those institutions like microfinance, which make use of zakat and awqaf to become more friendly or to become more affordable, as we know about Islamic microfinance, for example. Now, when we're talking about mainstreaming of these institutions, we are talking about mainstreaming of zakat and awqaf. We must have a regulatory environment which is conducive to reforms in these sectors, which is conducive to doing away with the bad practices or some archaic provisions which are no longer beneficial or which rather act as an obstacle in the way. And also we need to foster innovation and creativity. So our laws, you have these awqaf laws in many countries, in fact. For example, I come from India, and India has seen dozens of acts, since the time of the Britishers. We have seen these laws have been there in place, and these laws have been changing, fortunately, for the better. But they must change at a much faster rate, much faster pace. We attribute a lot of success in the Islamic social finance sector in the Southeast Asia, specifically in Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore, to a proactive regulation, to proactive regulatory framework. And we have seen how laws have been changed, regulations have been modified in response to new realities, new ground realities as they surface. You need to change your laws to be able to catch up and to be able to encourage so that these innovations or the creativity that is there among the indigenous population, that takes shape in the form of new laws or new provisions which are conducive to mobilization of zakat and also their effective utilization, and also the effective utilization of awqaf as a sustainable source of funding. So that is at the macro level. We need a regulatory and policy level. But that is, again, if allow me, I would also very briefly touch upon the next two levels. Having a good regulation is not just good enough, because as we have seen in the context of Maghrib region, that we just produced a report on that. And in the Maghrib region, we covered 5 countries, in which 2 countries, especially you have Algeria and Libya. They have had a dedicated law of zakat for a pretty long period now. In fact, it is, I think we have the data starting from beginning of the millennium, when these laws have been there. And in response to these laws, an infrastructure also has been created. You have dedicated zakat fund at the national level, like we have here in BAZNAS. So you have a contemporary of BAZNAS in Algeria and Libya for a long time, for many, many years now. But you don't have, what you lack is a supporting infrastructure. You don't have the supporting network. You don't have the universities teaching zakat and awqaf in their curriculum. You don't have the training programs for Amil Zakat or for zakat professionals. And you don't have the right kind of, the consultants who are willing to help zakat organizations to how to do their job better. So basically what you lack is a culture of Islamic social finance, for which you need a lot of infrastructure and supporting organizations at a meso level, and which is where we find a lot of good practices are there in this part of the region, and which needs to be replicated. Similarly, at a micro level, you need to have some good examples which could be replicated, followed by others. Some good NPOs, non-profit organizations, who are able to mobilize zakat because they enjoy a lot of credibility among the people, and because of that, they have been experiencing steady increase, growth in the mobilization of zakat and also in mobilization of cash waqf. That is where they can set good examples for others to follow. So this is, again, it is something lacking, that just by having a good regulation, you are not going to resolve the problem. So you need a support infrastructure, supporting institutions at the middle level, that is meso level, and also at the grassroots level, you need to have real good examples, real good success stories, which can be replicated by others.
That is very insightful perspective, sir. So, talking about the Maghreb countries, and you say that Wakaf came to Maghreb countries with Islamic conquest, initially in the form of religious awqaf. Yes, it is soon become like dominant sectors of the economy, making provisions. So, and then it is found that some of the assets in Wakaf has been lost. So, how do we identify the lost assets today? I mean, how do we find it? How do we collecting it again? I mean, how do we make how do we identify the lost it?
Yeah, this is a major problem facing the global Awqaf sector, actually, especially countries which were under the Muslim rule. They have seen phenomenal rise in the Awqaf sector, to the extent that we have historical records which say that, let's say in some countries, we have half or one third of all, land, being part of the Awqaf. So it reached to a certain, very high level of, I would say being a part of the overall economy. But then these Muslim rules were followed by colonial rules. And if you go into a history of many of the Muslim countries, you'll find that they have been ruled by the Britishers or the French. And because of this, or the Dutch, because of the colonial rule, a lot of these awqaf were actually either diluted, or their ownership was diluted, or they were encroached upon, not by these rulers necessarily, but also by greedy local population, who could see that here is awqaf property, which whose ownership is the records are not up to date. So and the monopoly of a huge tract of land. So there is no one to question me. The laws are too weak to penalize me if I make a mistake or make an error, and then nobody knows what is the zakat awqaf property meant for. So I can abuse it if I want to, and the law doesn't have enough teeth or enforceability to punish me. So I start using it, and that's the kind of encroachment, large-scale encroachment we have seen. And because of which, what you need is a very strong law, which basically goes by the rule that once a waqf, always a waqf. So, which means the ownership cannot be transferred under any circumstances. But we have seen in some countries, at least, that the law is there, but then there are enough loopholes in the law which allow the mutawallis or the waqf boards, which are often the state-run agencies, they are able to sell off those properties to private parties. And there have been enough instances, which is so unsettling and is a source of so much of discomfort to the population, to the Muslim society as a whole. As we all know that if there is a waqf land, for example, we know that this is waqf land. But at the same time, we see that this is being managed by some private party, which has encroached upon this. Or there is a government building there which cannot be evicted. There is a government department which is functioning from the property. The people know it, but they can do very little about it without a proper law, or without the proper political will to enforce the law, or a proper machinery to enforce the law. So that has created a huge amount of, I would say, deficit in trust. I call it trust deficit among the masses. So that is the reason why they're not inclined to make new waqf in many of the countries. For example, again, I'll talk about my own country in India. The moment you organize a waqf seminar, the first question you come across is, how do you recover the lost awqaf? We have so much of awqaf that is lost, not only to the private parties, but also to the governments, to the state government, provincial government, to the central government. And there is no way this could be, recovered unless the law is there with enough teeth and also enforceability. Fortunately, we have had a good change in the law recently. Not very recently, in fact, it was 2013 when the latest reform in the Indian Waqf Act came. But then since then, there has been very little enforcement of the law. The law is very clear that yes, even if it is occupied by the government has to give it back or pay market rent. But as a piece of legislation in paper, it is not implemented. So there has to be political will, and most of the Muslim countries have huge tracts of agricultural land. We have seen in Maghreb region very recently that we have shared some numbers also, which could be again collected from records which are not so recent, but still from the obsolete records, you can make out that what is the huge size of this, what is the huge valuation of these properties, and many of these are very, very prime locations, located at prime, what we call prime properties, which could be very easily developed with private capital or additional waqf capital. So again, there has been a change in the law in at least Algeria and Libya. They're trying to change, reclassify many of these records. And IDB also has played a proactive role in Algeria. At least I know about instances where IDB has tried to implement a program of recovery of lost awqaf. A lot of properties have been recovered with legal help, with legal assistance. This can be recovered. This has been done in Algeria, for example. In Libya, even due to the government's own efforts, a lot of properties were reclassified. But again, unfortunately, that was all before the war or the strife that came up. Subsequent to the strife, we see very little, we hear very little about what's going on in the ground. But there was a concerted effort in Libya also and it yielded very good results. In fact, the numbers that are reported, they're all this pre-strife to Libya data, and that shows us that a lot of things can be changed. A lot of properties in Tripoli, province alone, they could be reclassified. The rentals could be, recalculated, and then they started generating a healthy 5 to 6% returns on the valuation. So that's a kind of a huge return. If you're talking about, let's say, 60 billion of asset in Indonesia, according to 2030 report that 2014 report rather. I don't have any data, fresh data on the valuation in Indonesia. But going by the data, on 60 billion, if you're generating 5 to 6%, that's a huge amount of money which can go for poverty alleviation, which can go for provision of other kinds of public goods. So not only you need a law, but the law must have enough teeth and must be enforced with adequate political will.
It's very interesting perceptions, Doctor. So, talking about wakaf in in Islamic social finance, wakaf as one of the instrument in Islamic social finance, but in Indonesia, mostly the locations of wakaf land is not in strategic locations. In fact, that Indonesia, the land of the wakaf land in Indonesia is 5 times of Singapore, but I think we are still, but it's poorly managed, and uh, I think we need, in your perspective, what is the best way, and do you have any suggestions how to manage the wakaf land, but the locations is not strategic?
I suppose a lot of agricultural waqf that are there. If they are all, there are big chunks of land, then you can do agriculture in an industrialized way, using mechanized agriculture, and the waqf can bring in private capital or bring in waqf capital. Both are possibilities. So, and the legal framework and the regulatory framework, the policy framework is all supportive of this. There is nothing that really stops that or that stands as an obstacle to this. So there is a way to bring in private capital. There is a way to bring in charity capital also through cash waqf. So both ways, both options are available. You have a possibility of going for sukuk, again, bringing in private capital or bringing in charity capital. So whichever way, you raise resources, but both sorts of resources could be made available for, developing this agricultural wakaf. That could be, one can think of, large mechanized agriculture, as it has happened in Sudan, for example. Sudan is a very good example of mechanized agriculture. They have large tracts of land which are not necessarily under waqf, but as an agriculture, centered country where agriculture is a very dominant part of the economy, Sudan has shown how mechanized agriculture can yield very good results. So mechanized agriculture can be tried out for large tracts of land, but where there are small holdings, if we're talking about small holdings or tiny holdings, scattered, well dispersed, this could also, there could be a scheme perhaps to engage small farmers. And there are Islamic contracts available, whether you are talking about output sharing contracts or profit sharing contracts or revenue sharing contracts. This could be employed along with the farmers, smallholder farmers or the small farmers, and this waqf land could start generating good returns. So these are all possibilities. What you need is, again, political will and also the societal will. The society collectively has to decide and move forward.
Thank you very much for your interesting explanations. And then there is questions from my friend that he asked, what will the biggest challenge in managing wakaf in the future? What would it be? I mean, maybe do you have any? What will be the biggest challenge and distribute in managing wakaf and zakat in the future?
The challenges are different. There are, of course, some common challenges facing the social finance sector. Again, they vary across governments, across countries and regions. So different regions have their different challenges. There are countries where, zakat is compulsory. You have the example of Malaysia, you have the example of Sudan, you have the example of Saudi Arabia. And we have seen that from, again, hard data that is available from the official agencies, that these countries where zakat is compulsory, again, that's a matter of law. That's a matter of legislation, which requires political will, which requires the legislators to come forward and, legislate accordingly or enact accordingly. But these three countries, what we have seen, the zakat collected by the official agencies, which are well integrated with the tax authorities or the fiscal machineries in case of Saudi Arabia and to some extent in Sudan, not so much in Malaysia, where the zakat collection is in the hands of the state Islamic religious councils, whereas you have the Ministry of Finance taking care of the taxation aspect, the fiscal aspect. They're not well integrated, but nevertheless, there is a incentivization of zakat collection through a matching tax benefit, which means if I pay $1 as zakat, then my tax liability goes down by $1. It is not getting a tax benefit as a percentage of the zakat I contribute. No, it is straight away one-to-one matching. And that is possible only when zakat is compulsory. And also your zakat is well integrated with the fiscal machinery of the government. Otherwise, it's very difficult. Where zakat is voluntary, this kind of incentivization might lead to a lot of loss of revenue for the government. That's why governments would be more reluctant to give this kind of fiscal incentive, a matching tax benefit or a tax, reduction to the extent of zakat paid to the zakat payers. So that is point number one, that if zakat is compulsory, certainly we have seen that they are much ahead in terms of realizing the total zakat potential. In fact, we have some hard data to prove it also. We calculated the zakat calculated for very recently. It is also part of the report and also part of our presentation, the official presentation. You can see there that if when we estimate the zakat collected or zakat potential that can be collected using any of the different formula, researchers have generally used three different methods of calculating zakat potential. Now it varies between 1 to 3 or maximum 4%. You use any method of zakat calculation, 1 to 4% of the GDP of a particular country.
Okay.
So this was used again to calculate very roughly the potential zakat for different countries. Now you know that Indonesia has a very huge GDP compared to Malaysia or compared to any other country, that in the Muslim world that we are talking about. So with such huge GDP, when you calculate in terms of percentage, of course the zakat potential is too big as compared to the zakat that is actually calculated. Now there could be other reasons for that. Again, that is why there is a strong, I would say, many people strongly feel that Indonesia should very strongly think in terms of bringing in similar tax incentive as many of these countries which have made zakat compulsory they have gone for. But again, that's a very, very a political question, and also you require to see the ground realities, which action is going to suit the best. That the country, how it serves the country's interest best. Indonesia has made it voluntary for a variety of reasons. So is the case in many other countries where zakat is largely seen as voluntary, and you get tax advantage, certainly. Not a matching benefit, but certainly a tax benefit. So that is why zakat is largely seen as a kind of philanthropy, where it is voluntary. Where it is compulsory, it is largely seen as a tax. That's the big difference. When you see it as a tax, you talk about the burden of tax. In fact, there has been some researches also where they try to test the hypothesis as to why people evade zakat. And similar reasons have been forwarded, hypothesized that people evade zakat just as they would like to evade tax, income tax. And there are different hypotheses for that. So basically what it means is that implies basically because zakat is compulsory, it is being perceived as a kind of tax. And then you try to pay or avoid zakat using your the best possible way, whatever is available legally speaking. But at the end of the day, the quantum of zakat collected is a kind of tax that is being collected, and the quantum is much larger than otherwise it would be. Whereas in those countries where it is voluntary, and nobody has the last word as to which is better, whether you have to voluntary zakat is better or compulsory zakat is better, you have very different views coming from experts. And we cannot, subscribe to one specific view that, no, this is the best. Every country has to decide for itself what is the best way to collect zakat. But what is common, what we have seen, that for zakat to be mobilized with utmost efficiency is for a state to play some kind of a proactive role. As you have here, BAZNAS, the national agency, which is playing a very proactive role in zakat collection and mobilization and its proper utilization. If you don't have such a state agency in the first place, irrespective of whether zakat is voluntary or compulsory, still zakat would continue to be seen as a kind of voluntary, charity, which you have if you are a very strong believer in your faith, then you will pay. And if you don't pay, there is no questions asked. There is nobody to knock at your door to tell you that you are doing a wrong thing and you should be paying the zakat. This Ramadan time. So this is why the zakat mobilization is affected very badly when you don't have a zakat agency, and also you don't have a network of zakat professionals who are after you, who are trying to persuade you to pay your zakat in time, who are trying to help you in estimating your zakat liability, and who are trying to tell you that if you don't pay zakat, even if it is not compulsorily mandated by the state, but it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who has mandated it, so you must pay zakat. So this is why you need a network of zakat institutions. You need a state agency, a centralized agency with a distributed network, with its branches all across the state, all across the country, and would reach out to the people, trying to persuade them to pay zakat, or trying to mobilize the zakat for people who are willing to pay, coming forward to pay. And then also, not only it doesn't stop at that, you create more credibility, more trust by allocating zakat in the most efficient way, in the most effective way, and in conformity with the Sharia mandates, in conformity with the Sharia requirement about eligible beneficiaries. The zakat must be spent on either of the 8 asnaf which had been mandated by Sharia. So that is something that needs to be monitored, that needs to be, whether it is legally a crime, a completely separate issue. But what is required is credibility of the zakat institution, and for that, you need a good practices to come into place.
Thank you for.
And if you also want to know about awqaf, maybe perhaps if you are more specific, then I can respond to the questions.
Thank you for it is very insightful explanations, Doctor. So, alhamdulillah, Mr. Kamal, our brothers from Sudan, has joined us today. Assalamualaikum, Mr. Kamal. Mr. Kamal. Oh. We can't still hear your voice. Please unmute the Please unmute the microphone, Mr. Kamal. Mr. Kamal, please unmute the microphone first so we can hear your voice clearly. Okay. While we are waiting for Mr. Kamal's unmute his account, then let's there will be another questions from our friends. The question is for Wakaf has been integrated. The question is, Wakaf has been integrated with the Islamic capital market. What about the countries in North Africa? Is there any effort to integrate Wakaf with the capital market? Dr. Obaidullah, can you hear my voice?
Yes, of course. Yeah. Okay. Question is for me? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, Waqf as actually integration of the Waqf with the capital market it is just the beginning that we are witnessing. And we have seen the emergence of the Waqf Sukuk, and especially the cash-linked Waqf Sukuk in Indonesia. That's a huge success story, I must say. And there's a lot to learn from this and to be able to replicate this, not only more frequently in Indonesia to mobilize more and more resources, but this is a very good example for other countries to follow suit. And again, in other countries also, I would say there have been similar attempts at integrating the capital market with the Awqaf. Malaysia is one example, and Singapore is another example. Other than Southeast Asia, we really haven't seen much. But the fact remains that the Moroccan regulation, the Moroccan law of Awqaf, does provide for this possibility. It very clearly, and this is the best feature I would say about the Moroccan law of Awqaf, or the set of laws that we covered in the Islamic Social Finance Report for the Maghreb region, that they do talk about the issuance of Awqaf Sukuk. And for Algeria and Libya, unfortunately, they don't talk about Sukuk, but they do provide for the use of private capital for developing the Awqaf. And they don't specify that it has to be through Sukuk or through the capital market, or it is just private capital which is coming forward, or which has to be commingled with other forms of capital and develop properties. But Morocco, certainly Moroccan regulation does provide for this. It specifically mentions for issuance of Awqaf Sukuk. And what it rules out, interestingly, is private capital. The Awqaf Sukuk that it talks about are basically in the nature of, again, benevolent capital, or, I would say, non-profit, capital, or capital that is that's not seeking market rates of return. So you can offer a very below market return to, on this particular this Sukuk, but we haven't seen the real issuance so far. The law is there, but it has not been implemented, and we are yet to witness in the first case of Sukuk issuance. But the potential is very much there because the law now permits this. So this is a distinct possibility, and I think as the awareness grows across the board, Libya is on the verge of it has prepared its draft laws for both zakat and awqaf, and I think to the best of my knowledge, but I may be wrong there perhaps, but for Islamic microfinance as well. But then these have not been translated into law so far. One can only hope that these also become laws in near future. And not only that, the agencies that are responsible for development of Awqaf, they are able to read these possibilities and act upon it. It is one thing to be able to have something in the law. It is another thing to utilize a particular provision for large-scale development. For example, again, I'll go back to the Indian example because of the, again, hugeness of the Awqaf asset there, the law, is completely, I would say, silent about development. And the word development is actually not there, except one or two places where it states that the Central Waqf Agency should develop the properties. It stops there. But there is no mention of the capital market. There is no mention of being able to generate a return on the developed asset and being able to service the private capital, as it has happened in Singapore, for example. The Singapore example is perhaps one of the earliest example. There are published articles or journal articles on this particular case study, where Musharaka Sukuk was offered by the Majlis Ugama Singapore to develop their properties. So that is involving private capital, and then being able to provide a certain return to the private capital providers, the Sukuk holders, the Musharaka certificate holders, and then eventually they are paid off the return on their original capital, and also the original capital they recover, and the work property eventually, the developed property, comes back to the Awqaf agency. So there have been such examples, but again, in Malaysia we have this initial Waqf offering to finance infrastructure, to finance a bus station in Johor province. This is a very good example of how the State Islamic Religious Council, which apparently we see this as a very rigid framework, that when every province has its own State Islamic Religious Councils, and which are effectively, and there is no private mutawalli or private nazir in Malaysia. So the nazir is also the Islamic Religious Council, and it is basically the final decision-making body. So one would expect some amount of rigidity there, because the private parties don't have a role there. But what we have seen very innovative practices in this particular case that I'm talking about, where the bus station was developed, private capital was, brought in, but in a different way, as an agent of the Islamic Religious Council. They were also given the responsibility to manage the property, and also the returns that are coming to the Awqaf on the Waqf shares. This is a case of corporate Waqf. And on this corporate Waqf, whatever returns are generated, part of these returns they go back to the State Islamic Religious Council, the Johor Islamic Religious Council in this case, and which is again using this part of the return to carry on its various philanthropic works. Part of the returns are actually paid, let's say if the return is X, then 90% of that goes back to maintenance of the asset itself. Out of that 10%, let's say 5% goes back to the Islamic Religious Council for its various philanthropic activities. Another 5%, let's say, it goes back for, again, as a benefit to single mothers who are having shops within the premises of the bus station. So this is a brilliant example, I would say, creative example of developing your infrastructure, which is a bus station, and the public is going to benefit from this developed bus station. But at the same time, you are using corporate Waqf to develop the whole thing. And then the Islamic Religious Council also is able to carry on its regular activities from a percentage of the returns that are generated on the corporate shares, which are now Waqf shares. And then part of that also benefits the people who have their own shops within the bus station. So again, you have multiple benefits going for multiple beneficiaries, all because of this benevolent institution called Waqf. And also we have seen the Securities Commission in Malaysia has come forward with a lot of guidelines for how to really, the guidelines specifically for engaging the private capital providers, the private investors, how they could be brought in, how the investment companies can play a role in developing the Awqaf property. So you have the detailed guidelines there. So this is an attempt, again, to integrate Waqf with the capital market.
Thank you for your explanations, Doctor. Now we have 15 minutes before we end these sessions. There are still one questions from our friends. It is from Careport. It's for Mr. Obaidullah. Is the Zakat and Waqf financial report accounting mixed? Is it managed in one institutions? It is from Hilmi Jundi Careport, Indonesia. The floor is yours, Mr. Obaidullah.
Okay, if I understand correctly, this is about the question about the project itself, the Islamic Social Finance Report, right?
Right.
Yeah. This project is actually owned by IRTI, Islamic Research and Training Institute, which is an entity of within the IDB Group, the Islamic Development Bank Group. This project actually was originally envisaged, designed to meet the information gap within the Islamic social finance sector. It was way back in 2013, I would say, 2013 or 2014. That was a time when we came across a lot of good reports, global Islamic finance reports, which catered to the mainstream Islamic banking, insurance, and capital market. But at the same time, we were receiving a lot of requests for data and information pertaining to zakat, awqaf, or what we call the not-for-profit Islamic social finance, Islamic microfinance. And being at the, sitting within IDB, we didn't know what was happening in the different IDB member countries when it comes to the zakat sector or awqaf sector and so on and so forth. That's why this project was designed as an ongoing project that let us focus on a specific region and get to the field, because it takes time to collect data. Most of the data is primary data in nature. That's why it took more time than what was originally planned. That we started out with Southeast Asia and South Asia, the 7 countries there. The first report was published in 2014. It is basically an internal group researchers from within IRTI, but we work with researchers from the region that we are covering. For example, the Maghreb region, this time we engaged about 13 researchers. We have acknowledged their contribution in the report itself. They have been the people who went out to the field, who really collected the data, who interacted with the Zakat Fund, and shared the data with us. So our job at the internal team was to collect the data. Of course, it starts much before that, the designing of the data collection exercise itself, the identification of the researchers, and then we conduct preliminary workshops to train our researchers, the field data collectors, as to how to collect data and what data points to be to collect. And then there is a validation workshop that follows after the data is shared with us. Then we go back to the field again and bring them together to see, to validate the data. And eventually, this data is used as part of the report. So it is a collective exercise between IRTI researchers and also some of the very carefully selected researchers from the region where we conduct where we focus on a particular, report.
Thank you very much for your interesting explanations. Now we have Mr. Kamal Mohamed has been joining us. Assalamualaikum, Mr. Kamal.
Waalaikumsalam.
Alhamdulillah.
Waalaikumsalam.
Alhamdulillah. How are you, brother?
I'm fine. I'm very glad to share you this debate with Dr. Mohammed for the rich information. Yes. Yeah.
It is my pleasure for having you on air. So, Mr. Kamal, let's go. Mr. As an expertise of zakat in Sudan, can you explain to us how Islamic social finance rose towards alleviating the humanitarian crisis in North Africa country, especially in Sudan?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for Dr. Mohammed.
I think he has unstable internet connections. So,
could you repeat the question? Maybe I can, to the best of my knowledge of Sudanese sectors, maybe I'll try. What was the question, sister?
The question is just to explain how Islamic social finance rolls towards alleviating the humanitarian crisis in North Africa, especially to his country in Sudan.
With permission from Brother Kamal Mohamed, if I may answer this question, or try to answer this question. Sudan is one of those countries that we just discussed, which has a very elaborate infrastructure. They have a central agency, which is called Diwan Zakat. And then this Diwan has its own state level or province level, Diwan in every province. And Zakat payment is mandatory. And you have the Sudanese law as one of the brilliant pieces of legislation, which is available on the internet also. Actually, Sudanese brothers, we have learned a lot in the course of our development of our core principles for Zakat supervision, where BAZNAS has played a leading role and Bank Indonesia has played a leading role. And the working group also included brothers from Sudan and specifically from the Diwan Zakat. Now, they also were kind enough to share the exact piece of legislation with the working group. And there we came to learn about how minutely they have dealt with each and every aspect of Zakat. Not only they have a good Zakat infrastructure, very elaborate infrastructure, which adequately takes care of the governance related issues, but also they are able to share the information and every aspect of their Zakat with the rest of the world. That's the best part of it. And then another interesting thing about Zakat in Sudan, and also in the sub-Saharan Africa to a large extent, that we find non-monetary Zakat taking care of a very sizable percentage of the Zakat is in the form of crops or is in the form of cattle. So which is why there are additional challenges for a Zakat body like Diwani Zakat. I think for an agency like BAZNAS, for example, you have more of your Zakat in monetary Zakat. Zakat is paid in monetary terms. So collection is that much easier. The cost of collection is not very high. But when it comes to collecting the cash crop, the crops, by sending the Amil Zakat to the field, to the agriculture farms, they go there and see the produce and then they collect Zakat. Then you have to have a warehouse to store that Zakat. And if you are collecting, let's say, cattle, then you need a storage facility for the cattle as well. And all these cost a lot of money. So, which is why there is an interesting variation in the law. The law allows the Zakat bodies to go up to 20% of the Zakat can be utilized as cost of operation, because operation is much higher. And we found the primary reason was the collection of the non-monetary kind of Zakat, and which has many of additional challenges, like pilferage, for example. When the Amil Zakat is collecting, let's say, crops and bringing it back, there are chances of, the chances of pilferage, the chances of theft, burglary is much higher than, a system which can, let's say, receive using a digital format, bank account, you transfer your Zakat money. That's not that much easier or less costly. So we have these innovative or new types of Zakat you'll find in Sudan, and they're doing a good job of meeting these challenges.
Thank you for the explanation, sir. So we have already have Mr. Kamal Mohamed, and then Assalamualaikum, Mr.
Alaikum assalam.
Alhamdulillah. Talking about the managing Zakat in Sudan, can you please describe to us the policy and the regulations of Zakat in Sudan?
Okay, fine. Sorry, we have some problems with the internet here in Sudan. Sorry. Anyhow, for the regulations in Sudan, as I said before, in Sudan, Zakat is completely governmental. It is compulsory. It is not obligatory, by the way. So So the Director General of the Zakat here is nominated by the Prime Minister. Okay, so we have at the central level, we have the headquarters, the Zakat Chamber, and the General Manager, and then down to the state. We have 18 states here in Sudan. In every state, we have a manager. Then the third level is the locality level. And in the locality, we have a manager there with the staff. Most of the work of Zakat is done in the central level and the state level. It is only for planning and observing. Okay, but in the locality level, Zakat process is going from the locality level. We have the manager there and we have the staff. This staff will be prepared, and you are working on 3 issues: to collect Zakat, then to distribute Zakat, and to manage Zakat at the locality level. At the central level, it is only for planning and to monitor. At the state level, also for planning and monitor. So, really Zakat at the locality level. In the locality level, we have the teams. And these teams are concerning with collecting zakat from the payer. And the same team also will distribute zakat for the deserver. So we are, for the collection of zakat in Sudan, we have about 7 types sources of zakat. Zakat, the stock, zakat of tradeware, zakat of livestock and agricultural products. Hello?
Hello. Yes.
Hello?
Hello. Yes.
Yes, it's clear.
Yes, it is quite clear.
So for the collection of zakat, we will prepare the teams so as to go and to meet the payer of zakat. The team is consisting of 3 employees. They go and meet the payer of zakat. So they negotiate with him to pay the nisab. If he reaches the nisab of zakat, he will pay the zakat. If not, they will leave him. They do not take zakat from him. So for the 7 sources of zakat, the same team will collect the zakat of livestock, then collect the zakat of agricultural products, zakat of tradewares, and so on. All the pairs, this team must meet all these pairs of zakat and must negotiate with them the amount to be paid by the pair himself. So it is not easy to do zakat. It is not voluntary, and also we haven't this type of digitalization to pay zakat through apps, for example. We haven't it. We collect zakat directly from the payer of zakat, even in kind or in cash. So if we want to collect the zakat of livestock, we can take it in kind. Sheep, camel. The team will collect the zakat from the payer, and then they gather it, and then they market it. Also, we can take it in cash. So it is very difficult to practice zakat directly with the payers because we do not take it through a digital system. We haven't any digital system in Sudan. We are working directly with the payers. And this team will reach all the payers of zakat in the locality. It is very difficult and it is costful. It is of high cost to collect zakat, to manage zakat in the locality. It is of high cost. You pay more for this collection. Also, for the distribution of zakat in Sudan, we distribute the zakat through what we call the Grassroot Committee. The Grassroot Committee. In every locality, we have, in every quarter or village or nomad area, we have a committee. This committee consists of 5 persons. This is regarding the distribution of zakat. How we distribute zakat in Sudan. We have this grassroots committee in every village, in every quarter or nomad area. In the masjid, we go to the masjid in the area and we ask the people to select 5 or 7 persons so as to be the grassroots committee. They are responsible from telling the zakat chamber employees the deserver of zakat. So the grassroots committee is the focal point for the activity of zakat. If we want to distribute zakat in Sudan, in the locality, we must go through the grassroots committee. The imam of the masjid is the head of this committee. Then we have the youth, and then we have the women, and then we have the payers of zakat and the scholars. These are the 5 members of the grassroots committee. When zakat chamber want to distribute zakat to the deservers, we will go directly to the grassroots committee. Then they ask them to choose, for example, in a quarter or a village, zakat chamber will say we need 5 or 6 poor people. So the grassroots committee will choose these 5 persons, and they tell the zakat employee that list, and then they will meet this deserver one by one. They visit them and speak to them. If they want to give them a productive projects, it depends on the situation of the family. So we have 2 types of helps: to give them subsidized or to give a productive project. If the situation, it differs from one family to another. If the family have an idea to manage a project, a productive project, then we go and study. We make a visibility study for this project. What type of project? They may need, for example, ships. They may need money to manage, to do business. They may need anyhow productive project by them, by the family itself. The family will choose the suitable productive project. Then in Zakat Chamber, we fund this productive project. We give them, we provide for them, for the family, a complete productive project. So these are the 2 ways that we give the deservers the zakat. Through, of course, through the grassroots committee. So you can say we depend completely, and they are voluntary. The grassroots committees, they didn't touch any sort of help or salary from the zakat chamber. We have about 20,000 members of grassroots committee all over the Sudan. So they are working voluntarily. They have no salaries from zakat, and they are very important for the zakat chamber because they help zakat chamber to reach the deservers in the villages and in the nomad area, in the quarter, in the towns. It is through this voluntary body, Zakat Rules Committee, that we can reach the deserver, the need of zakat. And their work is their role is very important. They haven't any salaries from zakat chamber. They are amil. We consider them as amil, but we cannot give them any salary from zakat because of you can't give them from zakat because their number is very high, 20,000 member. If you give them all the zakat, you cannot pay for them salaries. So they do it voluntarily in Sudan. The Zakat Rules Committee are very essential, and they are helping the Zakat Chamber to achieve their objects and to reach the poor people and the needy. Without them, the Zakat Chamber can do nothing. It is only through them that we can reach the poor people, the needy, and we can give our help, our assistance to them. So for collection, we do it, the employee themselves, they do the process of collecting zakat through the team. And this team is nominated from zakat. They are employees in zakat. They have their salary. The question of collection is completely depend on employees from the zakat chamber. When you go to the distribution process, we depend completely on the grassroots committees, and they are doing their work voluntarily. So this is, to some extent, the idea of managing zakat in Sudan. Also, we have dawah, we have collection department, we have distribution department, management department, and dawah department. Doing dawah through also employees to explain the issue of zakat for all the people and to negotiate them about the application of zakat if there are any problem here and there, if there are any questions from the payers of zakat. And the deservers also themselves. I will give you example. For example, somebody is suffering from a disease. When he bring the cost, about $10,000. So the zakat chamber sometimes may not pay all this cost. They contribute only 80%. For example, from 10,000, we can give him 8,000. And sometimes we pay all the cost. But because of the high number of the deservers, we try to be, to some extent or somehow, to be just, you can share with them the cost of the treatment, for example. So for this reason, many times the deservers may say that zakat will not help us, or the sum of money given by zakat is very weak. But our reply is that the number of the people who deserve zakat is very big, and our fund is very short. So we will try to do some of justice between them. We give you the 50% of the total of your treatment, for example. This is only an example, but I think that those are the four main points that through them we manage zakat, to collect zakat compulsorily, and then to distribute zakat with the grassroots committees, and then doing dawah, and then also to manage zakat.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable insight. It is very insightful and very interesting explanations. I'm sure this will go a long way in understanding the implementations of Islamic social finance. Thank you once again, sir. And before we end these sessions, I would like to inform all the audience and all World Zakat Forum members countries that the Center of Strategic Studies of BAZNAS will be conducting the fourth ICONS or International Conference of Zakat, and it will be held on October 7th to 9th, 2020. The theme of its conference is Zakat Tech for Inclusive Development. So for those who want to submit the paper, you still have the time before the deadline. And for further informations, you may contact one of my friends of Center of Strategic Studies staff, and you may click the website iconsbaznas.com for further information, and it is organized by BAZNAS and also Ministry of Religious Affairs, Republic of Indonesia, and University and Erlangga University, Trisakti University, and also Kyoto University. And so, thank you for joining us today. We'll be listening to eminent speakers deliberating in the areas of Islamic social finance. All these valuable insights give us a new perspective that one should adopt while discussing this issue. For those who wants to see the record of this webinar, you may still searching in the YouTube BAZNAS TV YouTube channel, and we finally come to the end part of the sessions. For your information, I'd like to thank you so much to the speakers for informative and interesting perspective. It is very insightful, and also thank you so much for the online audience and who has participated in the sessions today. Hopefully, the webinar series will be beneficial for everybody. Thank you very much for your cooperation and for your time. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Brother Kamal. Thank you, Sister Astika. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.